The sun was sinking fast, coloring the sky in shades of orange and purple, and Sarah and Mark drove down the lonely road. They were looking forward to a weekend of relaxing in the woods, but the trip took longer than they expected. The road looped and turned through the dense forest, encountering no cars or buildings. The only thing that broke the monotony of the green-brown landscape was a dim neon sign in the distance advertising a gas station. "We should stop and fill up the tank before it gets dark," Mark suggested, a note of nervousness in his voice as he surveyed the bleak surroundings. Sarah agreed, feeling a rush of anxiety as they pulled up to the gas station. It looked old and abandoned, with peeling paint and rusted metal. The only signs of life were the flickering lights above the pumps and the convenience store. There was an oppressive silence in the air, save for the occasional hum of the neon sign and crickets in the bushes. "I'll get gas and you go inside and see if they have any snacks," Mark said as he got out of the car and forced himself to smile. He hoped there was someone inside who could give them directions to the nearest campground. He also hoped that nothing would happen in this creepy place. "Okay, just hurry up," Sarah said, grabbed her purse and opened the door. As she stepped out of the car, she felt a chill run down her spine. She looked around nervously, wondering if anyone was watching them from the shadows. She wished she hadn't stopped here. "Hey, don't worry, it'll be okay," Mark said, trying to reassure her. He walked over to the pump and inserted his credit card. He looked at the screen, but it was blank. He pressed a few buttons, but nothing happened. He frowned, feeling a rush of frustration. "Great, this thing is broken," he muttered. "What?" asked Sarah, hearing him from the other end of the car. "The pump, it's not working," Mark said, raising his voice. He pulled out the card and tried another pump, but it was the same. He cursed under his breath. "None of them work," he said. "Maybe we should leave," Sarah said, feeling horrified. She didn't like this place at all. She felt like something bad was going to happen. "Where to go? We don't have enough gas to get to the next town," Mark said, shaking his head. He looked at the store, hoping to see someone inside. But the windows were dark and dusty and the door was locked. He knocked on the glass, but there was no answer. He sighed, feeling helpless. "There's no one here," he said. "Where to go? We don't have enough gas to get to the next town," Mark said, shaking his head. He looked at the store, hoping to see someone inside. But the windows were dark and dusty and the door was locked. He knocked on the glass, but there was no answer. He sighed, feeling helpless. "There's no one here," he said. "Leave to go where? We won't have enough gas to get to the next town," Mark said, his voice tinged with frustration and rising panic. He looked at the store, hoping to see someone inside. But the windows were dark and dusty, their panes reflecting the eerie glow of the flickering gas station lights, and the door was locked. He knocked on the glass, but there was no answer. He sighed, feeling helpless, his mind racing with fear-fueled thoughts of impending doom. "There's no one here," he said, his words echoing hollowly in the desolate night. "Don't panic, I'll go inside now and see what's there," Sarah said, her voice trembling with a mixture of determination and dread. She hesitated for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest like a trapped animal, then nodded and headed towards the dimly lit store, her footsteps echoing loudly in the oppressive silence. The door groaned as she pushed it open, protesting the intrusion into its sinister domain, and a nightmare came to life before her. Blood covered the walls and floor like red paint splattered by a mad artist, its sickening metallic scent permeating the air like a tangible presence. It dripped from scattered shelves and overturned display cases, falling puddles on the grimy linoleum floor that seemed to pulsate with a life of their own. There was a thick odor of death in the air that made Sarah gag, its putrid stench clinging to her like a suffocating shroud. Cold sweat broke out on her forehead, tracing icy trails down her pallid skin, and her stomach knotted painfully with a nauseating mixture of horror and revulsion. She backed up, her eyes widening with unbridled terror, her mind recoiling from the grotesque tableau laid out before her like a scene from a macabre nightmare. "Mark!" she screamed, her voice raw with primal fear, running up to the car in a frenzy, her limbs trembling uncontrollably with adrenaline-fueled panic. "We have to get out of here now." Mark's eyes widened in alarm when he saw her pale face and trembling lips. He didn't ask any questions, just rushed to the driver's seat and turned the key in the ignition. But the car didn't respond. It was as if it had died along with the people in the store. He tried again and again, but the engine was silent, the dashboard lights flickering ominously in the darkness like dying stars in a void of despair. "It won't start," he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "It won't start." A deafening roar filled the air, drowning out their frantic attempts to escape. Turning, Sarah saw a shadowy figure emerge from the darkness, holding a chainsaw in one hand, its blade glinting with menace under the faint moonlight that pierced through the canopy above. "We have to run," she shouted, her voice barely audible over the roar of the chainsaw, grabbing Mark's arm and pulling him out of the car. They rushed into the woods, their hearts pounding with fear at the sound of the chainsaw behind them. Branches tore at their clothes and scratched their skin as they trudged through the undergrowth, breathing with difficulty, their panic-stricken gasps echoing through the silent forest like the anguished cries of lost souls. Just when they thought they had no more strength left, they stumbled upon a clearing flooded with moonlight, its ethereal glow casting long, eerie shadows that danced like specters in the night. It looked like a trap, a cruel mockery of safety in the midst of chaos, but they had no choice. They rushed forward, their lungs burning with exertion, their minds clouded with terror and desperation. But the relief was short-lived when they heard the growing sound of a chainsaw behind them. The music faded as the winter approached, and Christmas was just around the corner. I was 25 years old at the time of this story, planning to meet my friends who lived in another part of the city. The meeting place was 4 hours away from my home, so I decided to use my car instead of a taxi. It was the first time my journey was so long, and I was nervous. But by noon, I packed my things, tossed them in the trunk, and set off. It was a cold day, and the roads were clear and not heavily trafficked. With the holidays approaching, people preferred to spend time with their families and friends indoors, avoiding long trips. At the time, I was into social media and enjoyed posting photos for various occasions. So, I found this trip to be a perfect opportunity to share some snapshots of the road through which my route lay and the place where my friends lived. The landscapes were truly magical and enchanting, offering plenty of photo opportunities. It was engaging and interesting until the weather suddenly changed. It was around 6 in the evening, and I was still on the road, having not yet completed half of the planned route. Suddenly, it started snowing. These weren't just tiny snowflakes, but thick, heavy flakes that covered the road's shoulders with a significant layer of snow within 15 minutes. I began to worry as it was getting dark, and I still had half the journey ahead of me. My car slowed down, and I had to drive on empty roads while a wild snowstorm raged. I decided to stop at the nearest gas station, which hadn't been visible until now. Finally, I saw a glimmer sparkling in the distance. It was a gas station. I immediately pressed the gas pedal, parked the car, and swiftly entered. The cold intensified as soon as I stepped inside. The building looked like a small convenience store with a few aisles. Behind the counter stood a guy, an ordinary man who didn't say much. He only inquired about my route and remarked on the worsening weather. After a brief conversation, I bought some chips, drinks, and settled in a chair in the far corner. Night fell, and I rested while snacking and scrolling through Instagram. Soon, the door of the store opened. It was a peculiar-looking man with long greasy hair, wearing a long coat and a grim expression. He bought cigarettes and sat a few chairs away from me. At first, he didn't even notice my presence and activated his phone to also browse. Since the store was small, the clerk quickly ordered him to stop smoking, but he ignored it. The guy behind the counter couldn't enforce the rule, so the conversation ended there. I hated cigarettes, and the man's heavy breathing irritated me. His breaths were so loud that when he reached for the fifth cigarette, I lost my composure and angrily exclaimed, "Enough." He stared at me wildly for a couple of minutes, his eyes red with anger, but then he calmed down, stopped smoking, and shifted his attention to his phone. Soon after, my friend called me and asked why I hadn't arrived yet. I recounted the entire story, and he assured me that the storm would soon pass, so I shouldn't worry. My gaze fell on the strange guy staring at my phone. I wondered what he wanted, maybe to steal my phone, but to my relief, after a while, the man stood up. After he left, I continued browsing Instagram, feeling somewhat uneasy but relieved. The stranger's departure at 10:30 p.m. coincided with the end of the storm. I thanked the clerk, left, started my car, and drove off. For some time, I drove in silence, the engine's hum the only sound. But then something happened. Now, I felt as if someone was breathing heavily. My heart pounded, and my palms were sweaty. Suddenly, the heavy breathing sounded too close. I glanced at the rearview mirror and screamed. A man was sitting on my back seat. I slammed on the brakes and jumped out of the car, feeling his cold presence chasing me. The road was empty, and I felt helpless as I realized that someone was pursuing me. I glanced back and saw him unnaturally running, holding a knife. I could have avoided it, wondering how he ended up in my car. Perhaps I had forgotten to lock it when I went to the gas station, but it was too late to think about it. My life was in danger because some psychopath was chasing me. Then I saw a faint headlight in the distance. I frantically waved my arms and screamed to get attention, thinking it was my friend who had come to pick me up because he was worried. Only then did I turn around and see that the man was no longer there. I made up a story for my new friend and told him the continuation of the story. He called the police. They arrived soon, and we all went to my car and noticed creepy carvings made with a knife on the back seat. The police couldn't find the culprit anywhere. After the interrogation, they let us go. We continued our journey in our cars, but the mood was somber. The perpetrator was never found, and to this day, I still wonder what would have happened if my friend hadn't shown up that night. Late at night, under the dim glow of flickering fluorescent lights, Clara pulled into the deserted gas station, her bladder on the verge of bursting. She hurried inside, only to find the restroom door locked and a sign ominously declaring it out of service. Groaning in frustration, she approached the clerk, a middle-aged man with tired eyes who seemed to be nervously glancing over his shoulder every few seconds, as if expecting something ominous to happen at any moment. "I really need to use the restroom," she pleaded, her voice tinged with urgency. The clerk sighed, his gaze shifting nervously. "Sorry, miss. It's closed for cleaning," he muttered, his tone betraying an underlying unease. Clara's desperation mounted, her heart pounding in her chest. "Please, I can't wait much longer," she implored, her eyes darting around the empty station, feeling an inexplicable sense of dread creeping over her. Inside, the air was heavy with the stench of disinfectant and decay, mingling with an unsettling metallic tang that made Clara's stomach churn. The single flickering bulb barely illuminated the cramped space, casting long shadows that danced across the dirty tiles, creating an eerie spectacle that sent shivers down her spine. Clara's heart raced as she hesitated, a sense of foreboding gripping her like icy fingers clawing at her sanity. As Clara's hand hovered over the door, her senses heightened, every nerve on edge. The soft whisper seemed to echo in the stillness of the restroom, reverberating through the dimly lit space like an ominous warning. Clara's heart pounded in her chest like a drumbeat of dread as she summoned the courage to push open the stall door. The hinges creaked in protest, adding to the eerie atmosphere that permeated the air. Inside the stall, the scene unfolded before Clara's horrified gaze with vivid detail. The stench of decay mingled with the metallic tang of blood, assaulting her senses as she took in the gruesome sight. The mutilated figure lay in a pool of his own blood, his contorted form a grotesque tableau of pain and suffering. Every shadow seemed to dance and twist, playing tricks on Clara's mind as she struggled to make sense of the nightmare before her. The flickering fluorescent lights cast eerie shadows that danced across the walls, distorting the already macabre scene. The man's eyes, sunken and hollow, bore into Clara's soul with an intensity that sent shivers down her spine. They seemed to plead for release, a silent cry for salvation from the torment that held him captive in this wretched place. Clara's scream pierced the silence, a primal cry of terror that echoed off the walls of the restroom, mingling with the soft whisper that still hung in the air like a ghostly lament. Before she could react, a sudden noise shattered the eerie silence. The handle to the restroom door began to turn slowly, the metal groaning in protest. Clara's heart thundered in her chest as she realized she was not alone. Dread washed over her as the door creaked open, revealing the darkness beyond. And from that darkness emerged something sinister. A chilling gust of wind swept through the restroom, extinguishing the flickering light bulb overhead and plunging the room into darkness. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she felt a presence looming over her, its icy touch sending a shiver down her spine. The darkness seemed to come alive, swirling and writhing like a living entity. Clara's mind raced with fear as she struggled to make sense of the surreal nightmare unfolding before her. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the darkness receded, leaving Clara alone in the dimly lit restroom once more. But the sense of dread lingered, a haunting reminder of the sinister force that had briefly invaded her world.